Welcome back to another episode of Staying, everyone. My name is Todd Rossnagel. I'm the Director of Communications for the Louisiana Annual Conference. It is great to have you along with us, along with my co-host, the Reverend Dr. Van Stinson. It is great to have all of you with us as we continue to talk to people in Louisiana about some of the issues facing the United Methodist Church, and specifically how those issues relate to those of us inside the Louisiana Conference. And joining us today for more on the issues is the Reverend Weldon Bares, who's going to be one of our special guests, and we welcome him to the studio this afternoon. Weldon, it is always great to catch up with you. It is great to see you here in studio.
Well, thanks, Todd. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
And just so everyone knows the background of Weldon, he is the pastor at First United Methodist Church in Lake Charles. He is a native of Lafayette, went to the University of Southwestern Louisiana when it was called Southwestern Louisiana with a major in communications. And he is a graduate of Asbury Theological Seminary, ordained as an elder in 1981 here in Louisiana. So great to have you along with us. And also joining us again is the Reverend Dr. Van Stinson, who is the assistant to the bishop, chief of staff around here, and does so much. And Van, we thank you for joining us once again.
Always good to be here, Todd.
Well, let's get into our conversation with Weldon in this respect. One of the things, guys, that we have been talking about on these episodes is that the church is in some ways wrapped up in what I would refer to as political classifications and labels. And I say political because they're political terms like left, right, center right, progressive, conservative. And so just once again, for our viewers who are watching this, we are using those terms because that's what we've been using. And so we know at some point that those terms fall short of really truly classifying someone, if you will. But Weldon, I wanted to maybe ask you, using some of those terms, because we've talked to other people inside this, and we'll talk to other pastors, where would you classify yourself?
Mm-hmm. Like you, I kind of resist labels and characterizations, but to answer your question, I would say that I'm conservative theologically. I'm a traditionalist and have been all of my ministry. Believe Scripture and preach Scripture. It's just in my DNA to be an evangelical theologically.
And for the purpose of our conversation, would that be center right? Is that kind of
right? That's what I say. Mm-hmm. A little bit to the right of center.
Yeah. Okay. And so let's just start our conversation this way. If the current Book of Discipline and the wording inside the Book of Discipline were to change, would you be open to performing a same-gender wedding?
To answer that question, Todd, the answer to me is no. It's not in my theology to do that. My understanding of marriage is that it's between a man and a woman. So with love and tenderness, if someone came to me and asked me, I would say, no, I'm not theologically able to do that. Not that I've been asked a lot. I've been in the ministry for 41 years, and I've been asked one time to do a same-sex marriage. It's not like people are beating on the door at First Methodist Lake Charles to do that. And these were people who were driving through town and weren't connected to the church at all. But to answer your question, no, it's not in my theological understanding to do that. So I would say no.
So the reason why I asked that question, for a variety of different reasons, but one of them is as we've been calling this series of videos and podcasts Staying, one would think to themselves, and after what they've been hearing, that means that you, because you hold that position, have no other choice but to leave the denomination.
Not so. I have a choice, and my choice is to stay in the United Methodist Church. I'm just not going to conduct same-sex marriages, but I'm going to stay in the United Methodist Church. And a big reason for that, Todd and Van, is I've really thought about it a lot and struggled with it and prayed about it. And I would encourage anyone who's thinking about this to really spend some time in prayer and ask for God's wisdom. God promises, the book of James, that he will give us wisdom when we ask for it. And I've prayed for God's wisdom with this. And for me, I've heard God whisper to me to stay. For those who are hearing something else from God, I respect that. I respect their walk. I respect what God has said to them. I can only speak for myself, and God has whispered to me to stay in the United Methodist Church.
And I, we've talked about how, and you at home have talked about this as well, that, should the rules change, and somebody else in another context were to perform a same gender wedding, would you be okay with that?
Yes, I'd be okay with it. I'm not going to do it, and it won't happen at the church where I serve. But for another clergy person in Lake Charles or in Louisiana to do it, I'd be okay with that.
And Van, that is in some ways, again, part of the misinformation that's being spread out there is that someone like a Weldon has to leave the United Methodist Church.
Well, and Weldon, I appreciate you, saying that and framing it the way you did, and Todd, for you to ask that question, because so much of the information that we're hearing out there is misinformation. It says if you don't agree to do this, then you have no place in the United Methodist Church. If you stay in the United Methodist Church and you hold a position such as yours, you're going to be forced or mandated to perform a same-gender wedding. I mean, I can say in my almost 30 years of ministry, no bishop or district superintendent or anyone in authority or supervision over me has ever mandated that I perform or not perform any wedding. That's just not a part of how, we relate to our supervisor, much less our bishop. I would guess it's probably the same for you as well.
I've had people ask me, can't the bishop force you to do it? And I said, no, the bishop would not and could not force me to do it the same way that now, suppose an 80-year-old man came to me wanting to marry a 18-year-old woman. It's in my right to say, no, I don't feel comfortable doing this wedding, and no one can make me do it.
Yeah. And to that point, I think it would be incumbent upon all of us who believe in, and I'm going to throw out a phrase, who believe in the sanctity of marriage, who uphold that as an institution, as a vital part, of not only the social fabric, but of our tradition and our history in the church, that we would have the same standards for same-gender couples as we would have for opposite gender couples that we currently navigate through any sort of premarital counseling with. I think that's the misnomer out there somehow, that there's a different standard that should be applied. And I would push back against that to say, no, the same high standard of faithfulness and commitment and covenant should apply regardless, without coercion, without any sort of outside interference. And I think it's important to speak to that bit of misinformation.
Definitely. And just to add to that,
sure,
a same-sex couple that would come to my church who are married are welcome to the full life of the church.
Sure.
To join the church, I'd be happy to baptize their babies. They can be leaders in the church. And so the door is always open for that.
Sure.
Yeah. So Weldon, having that diverse view, or a view that is contrary to some others, do you see value, or what is the value in staying inside the United Methodist Church that holds such a diverse theological interpretation of this particular issue?
Yeah, twofold, I think, Todd. It has value to me personally. I personally believe in loyalty. And again, I'm not judging anyone who's feeling led to leave. I'm just talking about myself.
Right.
Loyalty is very important to me. And the United Methodist Church has been so good to me ever since I was a little baby baptized in the Methodist Church. I grew up in the Methodist Church, and the United Methodist Church started in 1968. So deep in my heart, I'm loyal to the United Methodist Church, and I want to stay that way. But I think there's value to the church also in having people of diverse theological opinions be in the same church. I'm conservative theologically, and our United Methodist Church needs conservatives to be in the church. And we need conservative churches. We need moderate churches. We need liberal churches. And I just want to plant my flag and say I'm a conservative theological pastor in the United Methodist Church.
I'm going to throw out a metaphor here that that we did not talk about before we started recording, and I know at some point all metaphors fall apart. So forgive me here, but it is one that I think the three of us could share, and that is of baseball. You can't have a team with just a bunch of sluggers. You can't have a team with just a bunch of single hitters. You need to have a well-rounded roster to really become a team.
That's right. All pulling in the same direction, all pulling for the victory, but teamwork with different opportunities, different skills, different abilities, different theological viewpoints.
Yeah, and the manager of a good baseball team will place those players, maybe specifically from a fielding perspective. Like I said, all good metaphors fall apart at some point. But from a fielding perspective, you want your best fielding person to be maybe at shortstop, the one with the best arm to be in right field. And from a cabinet and structural standpoint, the bishop and the cabinet, the wisdom of the cabinet is to do just that with those appointed as elders inside the United Methodist Church.
Absolutely. And I'll throw out a term too that has gained a lot of a lot of prominence in more recent years. It's always been present, but it certainly has become much more of an emphasis as certain things have shifted and changed. But that's the word consultation. There is an ongoing consultation in place between the district superintendent, the staff parish relations committee, the various pastors, the bishop, the cabinet, that is constantly looking to accomplish, again, metaphors break down, but accomplish exactly what you just said, to deploy the right people into the right places to fit the right contexts so that the mission of the church can be fulfilled. So the argument that says, or I should say the misinformation that says, well, if you remain in the United Methodist Church, eventually, the bishop's just going to send you a gay pastor, or you're going to get a progressive pastor, or you're going, all of these hypotheticals, I think, are premised in a bit of fear mongering, and speaking to the anxiety of folks. It would make no missional sense to force any pastor upon any congregation that's just not a missional fit.
That would be a fit.
Absolutely. All of those factors would be taken into consideration just as they are now.
Mm-hmm.
And I encourage our viewers, we are going to be talking about this, the way pastors get appointed, maybe not getting totally into the weeds, but we are going to be talking about some of the paths of ordination and how that relates to this issue. And that's coming up in some future episodes here. Weldon, I want to ask you a question, because being a pastor in Lake Charles, who is so connected, like all of our pastors are in Louisiana, what are you hearing as people bring to you some issues related to this specific issue? What are they bringing to you as far as concerns are concerned?
I'd say most recently, Todd, I've had a couple of folks come to visit with me under the assumption that when the general conference, or if the general conference makes changes next go round, that they'll change the articles of religion, and that the Methodist Church will no longer believe in the Trinity, and no longer believe that Jesus is God's Son and is the way to heaven. And each time that I visit with somebody like that, I just tell them it's not so. You've heard some mistruths. Is that a word?
Yeah.
If not, it should be. Yeah. Some bad information. Yeah.
And as we mentioned with Bishop Harvey, is her statement that kind of prefaced this entire series, nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah.
And so to casually just and to hear you affirm that is being heard at the local level is deeply troubling. Van, we can't just call a meeting and just change the articles of religion.
No.
It's a process. We've talked about that.
It's a big process, and we look back to the genius of John Wesley for many reasons, but I think very early on in the formation of the Methodist movement, Wesley understood some pretty significant essentials that were restricted from being changed, and particularly as the formation of of the sort of denominational expression of the Methodist movement came into place, certainly those articles of religion have withstood the test of time. There has been division before. There has been, separation before. There's been reunification. And those articles of religion have withstood the test of time because they are fundamental to who we are. And to change those or to amend them, requires such a significant threshold that it's never occurred in my lifetime. Weldon and I, we were talking about this earlier.
Right. Mm-hmm.
When you need 3/4 of a majority of the General Conference delegates, and then on top of that, 3/4 of every annual conference gathering of delegates to amend the Constitution.
In the whole United Methodist Church,
right? The whole United Methodist Church, that threshold is so significant that it just rarely, if ever, will happen. That's how serious these fundamentals are to who we are.
I brought the Book of Discipline because I underlined a couple of things that I've been sharing with the few folks who've spoken with me. Paragraph 17, Article 1, the General Conference shall not revoke, alter, or change our articles of religion or establish any new standards or rules of doctrine contrary to our present existing and established standards of doctrine. The General Conference shall not revoke, alter, or change our confession of faith.
Yeah.
So no, that's not going to happen, in spite of what people are being told.
Yeah. Let's go back, if we could, to the theological understanding that may lead one to perhaps, if the rules were to change, perform a same-gender wedding. And I'd like to just tease this out a bit with you, Weldon, because there is this thought process out there that if you were to, even though you hold, again, lack of better terminology here, a conservative viewpoint on this particular issue, but if you were to align yourself, even if you're not going to believe that, or potentially have someone who has a progressive viewpoint on that it leads to a slippery slope of no return. What is your response to that?
Yeah, I just don't agree with that. Still brothers and sisters with those in the United Methodist Church that I disagree with on these issues and maybe some other issues, but we're still in this together. So to me, it's not a slippery slope. To me, it's very clear. I'm not going to do it, but I love them and support their right to do it.
Van, what is your response to kind of this slippery slope statement that's out there, or belief that once you go down this point of no return, it's hard to turn the ship back?
Because the United Methodist Church and our predecessor denominational bodies were so aligned with I think the history and the formation of the country itself. The United Methodist Church in our structure and everything is very much aligned with the structure of the governmental system of the United States. So using that as the backdrop to this, I'm a citizen of the United States of America. If a law is passed that I may not agree with, but I'm compelled to obey, because I disagree with it, I'm not going to renounce my citizenship. If a member of a different party than I may align with gets elected and as president or as any other elected official, I don't renounce my citizenship or my residence in a particular state because of who gets elected or who doesn't get elected, or what law is passed or what law isn't passed. I think that's useful as a backdrop for, I think, membership in the United Methodist Church should never be contingent upon who the pastor is or who the pastor isn't, what bishop gets assigned or doesn't get assigned, or what particular disciplinary rule the General Conference, in its wisdom and discernment, chooses to change or chooses to leave in place. We can disagree with that and work for constant change, but to simply say, because this has happened, I now have to leave, in my opinion, that's the slippery slope that we need to avoid.
Yeah, I agree. Also tell my folks that changes made at the General Conference, when it comes right down to it, doesn't impact the ministry on the local level, like at First United Methodist Lake Charles. We'll keep on doing what we do in the same way that we do it, regardless of what General Conference says. It's not going to impact my ministry locally.
And speaking of that local ministry in Lake Charles, obviously several years ago, Hurricane Laura, Hurricane Delta, 500-year flood, ice storm, the area is still recovering. Did you ask United Methodists who came to help or to give a donation where they stand theologically on this particular issue? I know that's a bit of a snarky question.
No, it's not snarky. It's a good observation. Yeah. All of that reminded me of our connectional system and how wonderful the United Methodist Church is, that we're all connected. And when people came to help, of course, their stances on human sexuality didn't even come up. We just loved each other and cared about each other, and we cared about the mission that we have in Christ. So that was not important in a time of need and emergency.
Yeah. Van, I think that it seems to me that we're losing sight of the power of the connection. It's a talking point that I think it's not a talking point, it's a reality, but we at times, I think, can grow weary of saying it because it's so true all the time, but there is power to it.
Well, absolutely. And, I think Wesley, many quotes of Wesley, but if your heart is my heart, then take my hand, is as my heart, then take my hand. Right. I mean, I think that's I think helpful here in this. I think that so much of the diversity within our denomination, certainly within our clergy connection, if we may just sort of use that as a microcosm, it holds the tensions in place. I need people who are more conservative than I am, to ground me in the fundamentals of my faith at times. I need clergy and colleagues who are more progressive than I may be on a particular issue, to help me not become so heavenly minded that I'm no earthly good. I think in that tension for all of us, people who have different approaches, different perspectives, make us all better, and I think help us be more faithful to who we are and who we are called to be. I used the example from Southwest Louisiana, Weldon, that we are currently, living in the midst of. I mean, the United Methodist Church is in partnership with the Mennonites and the Amish to do exactly what you just said a minute ago, Todd, to bring relief from the floods and the disaster and help residents get back on their feet, back in their homes. The pictures of the Mennonite women on the rooftop in dresses, putting shingles on a house is a powerful example. I think that just captures the core of what we're saying here. You do not have to agree on everything to join hands and to make a difference in the name of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And they are so inspiring to the people of Calcasieu Parish.
Yeah.
And
to all of us.
To all of us, yeah.
And the theological differences couldn't be more vast. But Jesus is the core.
Absolutely.
And Jesus is the thing. So,
but don't let our connectional system become trite. It's something that we need to really emphasize.
Yeah.
Because we're connected with United Methodists all over the world. And that's just so important to remember. We don't always agree, but we're connected.
Yeah. Well, then, final question for you. For some colleagues out there who may have people coming into their office with some of these these falsehoods and rumors, what is some advice for how to have these conversations in a graceful way?
Yeah, good question again, Todd. To be honest in our conversation, don't hold anything back. Don't try to cover anything up, but tell them how you really feel and what you see as the future of the United Methodist Church and where you stand in it. But encourage them, as I mentioned at the beginning, to really pray for God's wisdom in this. What is God leading you to do?
Weldon, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to drive over here and do this recording. I know you drove through
some bad weather coming over. Yeah.
Nasty.
It brought me closer to God.
But we thank you.
Thanks for asking me.
Absolutely. And Van, we thank you again for your time.
Always enjoy it.
And we
Thanks,
thank
Weldon.
you for joining us here on this video series. We want to encourage you to get involved. Leave us your comments. We'd love to read them, and because we know you have an opinion on this particular topic, and so we do want to hear from you. So please leave those comments below. And thanks again for joining us. And we look forward to another episode of Staying, a special episode of the Louisiana Now podcast. Thanks again for joining us, everyone.